following message is brought to you by Mike Koplitz. He is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church and an ordained Messianic rabbi. In chapter 7 of Luke's Gospel, we start on the 36th verse. We're only going to the 39th, very short story. We have a very interesting narrative about Jesus being at home. Now, he's reclining at a table, which indicates a meal was occurring. We're also told that he was in a Pharisee's house. They don't identify the Pharisee, but he's in a Pharisee's house. Now, this reminds us that Jesus came for everyone. He came for those who love him and appreciate salvation and forgiveness that he offers, but he also came for those who didn't understand who he was or might have flat out rejected him. That's why he's in a Pharisee's home. To continue with the story, he's having dinner with the Pharisee. There would have been men around the table, and the women would be serving the men. And I'm sorry, ladies, that was the custom of the day. Mary Magdalene comes into the house uninvited. She starts to pour perfume oil on Jesus' feet and wipes it with her hair and some other things. So let me stop at this point in the story, because there are some very important customs you need to be aware of when you try and understand this story. Now, the first is when a dinner was held in a house, the women of the house would prepare the meal and they would serve it to the men. The men would sit at a table in a reclined position. Now, the reclined position comes from the understanding of what happened during the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. If you go to a Passover Seder, you would find that if the people are being true to the tradition, they would be at the table reclining. Now, of course, today that's tough to do because we're in chairs, where in Jesus' day they were sitting on the floor, where it's pretty easy to recline on the floor. Why were they reclining? Because free men and women reclined when they were at a dinner table. Shows that you're free. It's a custom that goes all the way back to Egypt and still used in certain places today. The other custom to understand is that only certain people were allowed in Pharisees' homes. Now, Mary Magdalene, she was considered a harlot, and there was no way she was getting invited into a Pharisee's home. That just wasn't going to happen. Therefore, she had to barge in while the dinner was going on in order to do what she did. Now, we know from the story that the Pharisee, head of the household, still don't know his name, tried to stop her. And Jesus said, no, let her do what she's doing. Now, by Jesus allowing her to stay in the room and anoint his feet, he was demonstrating the mission that God sent him on. And that is, God sent Jesus to be for the entire world, not just a small population. The other part of the culture I need to inform you of is that women did not touch men who were not their husbands or very close family member. The same thing goes for men touching strange women, except one exception to the culture, I must say, is that if a woman was a harlot, then men would touch her, and that was considered, or not, I should say, not considered a violation of the customs of the day, which I thought was pretty interesting. However, without the ability to touch the harlot, then you wouldn't have prostitution and, well, you wouldn't have any harlots. Problem solved. But that's not what happened back then. I know that might sound strange, or what? You're just saying, huh, really? Well, the culture made an exception for women who were prostitutes. Remember, you don't have to agree with what they did 2,000 years ago. We just have to understand that's what they did, and that's how they felt about things. Let's get back to the story now. You have the culture in place. There are many ways I can go from here, and I'm going to pick one, which is first impressions. The Pharisees in that house, they might not have known anything about Mary Magdalene. They didn't know what town she lived in. The Pharisees probably didn't even know she was a harlot at one time, because she didn't wear blackened eyes. They would wear blackened eyes. I guess that's another cultural thing. And they would wear colorful dresses. Well, her eyes weren't blackened. She's not wearing a colorful dress. And she can't be identified as a harlot. Now, they dress that way so men would know, oh, yeah, there's a harlot there. So the Pharisee said, no, Mary could not enter the house because of this first impression. So Mary Magdalene, she's outside the house because of this first impression that the Pharisee of the house had and decided she's a harlot. He probably figured, why else would she be following this band of 13 men if she wasn't earning some kind of living, let's say? Well, of course, she was not a harlot. She was forgiven for her sins. She turned her ways back to God. However, the Pharisee of the host of the house wouldn't have known that. He didn't ask. And he didn't understand. The fact that she's outside the house tells us that the Pharisee host thinks she's a harlot or thought she's a harlot. Now, think about it for a moment. The first impressions, we are told, are the lasting sometimes. We meet someone, you get a first impression of them, which can at times determine whether you like them or not. I remember in my business work days, a new project manager came from corporate down to the plant, and I was asked to set a PC up for her. Okay, sure, no problem. I did it. She spoke to me for a couple of minutes, and her first impression of me was not favorable. She also made it well known to her boss that she did not like me. That's just the way life is. However, she didn't give me a chance. She went strictly on the first 2 minutes chat. 3 years later, we were both in an interpersonal skills class together, and I brought this up because the understanding of how first impressions can be detrimental, because the instructor was talking about it. I looked her in the eye and said, sometimes we don't like a person we're talking to because we get this first impression within that first 15, 20 seconds, and then we shut down from trying to understand them. After the class, she came up to me and apologized for what she did to me 3 years ago and said she now had a very favorable impression. Wonderful to hear. Admittedly, we were never close buddies, but at least I was given a second chance. Think about how many times you met someone for the first time and developed your entire view of them in their lives based on first impression. First 60 seconds talking to them. Happens all the time, and it's something we should think about. The reason that we should think about it is because it prevents us from sharing Christ's love with them. I mean, let's be honest, with ourselves. Even though Jesus says we have to share goodness and joy and forgiveness and all these other things and gifts he gives us, with every person we meet, there are going to be people who at the first impression, you're going to have such a negative view that you're not going to talk to them about Jesus. If you're truly honest with yourself, the answer is yes. There are even people in your own congregations, in your own groups, who you refuse to talk to because you don't want to be around them because of the first impression being bad. What would Jesus say today? Well, the answer would be he would say, get over yourself and give the person a second chance. And then at this second chance, listen deeply and longer and get to understand who you're talking to. I want to share one more thing out of my life, and that is that I developed a first impression about a person I never met face to face. Wow. When I was going through my church ordination process, I had to meet with a committee of 3 to discuss theological views. One of the 3 persons was absent. The other 2 gentlemen each had one nice minor question for me, and they understood where I was coming from. The person who was absent had 17 questions that I had to answer. My first impression was not good about this person who came up with 17 questions when the other 2 guys came up with 1 apiece. That's a horrible way to decide about a person. Within a year of that event, I got the opportunity to meet him personally. And for the last 25 years, he has been my pastoral mentor. And I couldn't gotten to this point in ministry if it wasn't for his guidance. So this person, who I never met face to face, gave me a bad impression because he asked me so many questions. And he turned out not only to be my pastoral mentor, he also is a very close, and perhaps I can say my best friend. Today we discuss the research I'm doing in the theological positions of Christianity because he's so well versed and so open to any possibility. I value his opinion and his friendship. I'm not going to give you his name because he would blush and tell me about humility, which he has a lot of. He probably will read this message because I send him everything that I research and write. And I know I've talked to him about this and he knows it. I know he understands. So a big thank you to my pastoral mentor of all these years. If there is someone that you have judged based on first impressions, especially if it's a bad one, Jesus would want you to go back and talk with that person again. If that person is not a follower or disciple of Jesus Christ, I believe Christ would want you to share God's love with that person. We should be sharing God's love every day with every person we meet. Jesus said, love your enemies. What would he say today? Every one of us gets this great gift from God of forgiveness and eternal life through a fellowship and discipleship to God's Son, Jesus Christ. Not only tell your friends and family about it, tell your enemies about it. That's what it means to be Christian. Thank you for listening to this message. I hope it blesses you in some way. And as always, shalom.